Looking ahead, I want to say that the last gift we unwrapped still makes me feel scared and nauseous. I never used to believe in real evil, like the kind that watches you, that plans things, that enjoys making you afraid. Not until what happened to Emily. I think about it a lot, how it started. How, at first, it was just a small, harmless thing. A box wrapped in soft pink paper, tied with a neat red ribbon. A Valentine's Day gift. How could something like that ruin a person? It was a year ago, but I can still picture that night perfectly. It's burned into me, like an old scar that never quite fades. We had only been dating for a few months back then, but I already knew Emily was it for me. She was one of those people who made the world feel lighter, brighter. She had this laugh that made you want to keep talking just to hear it again, and she was the kind of person who saw the best in everyone. That's what scared me the most, because whatever happened that night took something from her. Changed her. 7:12 p.m. I was supposed to pick Emily up for dinner at 7:30. She had been excited all week, sending me screenshots of the menu from that little Italian place she loved, debating whether to get fettuccine or lasagna. Then, at 7:12, she texted me, "Hey, I'm feeling a little weird. Can we do a rain check?" Something about that message made my stomach tighten. Emily wasn't the kind of person who bailed on plans last minute, especially not ones she had been looking forward to. I called her right away. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," I said. "You okay?" She hesitated. Then, in a quiet voice, she said, "Someone left me a Valentine's gift. On my porch." At first, I didn't understand why she sounded so off. "That's sweet," I said. "Maybe it's from your parents?" She was quiet. Then, "No, I don't think so." The way she said it made me uneasy. "I'm coming over," I told her. I didn't wait for her to say yes. I just grabbed my keys and left. 7:26 p.m. Emily lived alone in a tiny rental house near campus, just a few streets over from mine. It wasn't a bad area, quiet, mostly students and young couples. The kind of place where people left their porch lights on at night and kept potted plants by their doors. But as I pulled up to her house, I felt something off. The street was too still. No one outside, no cars passing by. Just the distant hum of a streetlight buzzing overhead, flickering slightly. Emily opened the door before I even knocked. She looked pale. Her hands were trembling as she stepped aside to let me in, locking the door behind me. She pointed to a small box sitting on her coffee table. It was wrapped in delicate pink paper. A perfect bow sat on top, tied with a silk red ribbon. "I thought maybe it was from you," she murmured. "It wasn't." I sat down beside her. "Did you open it?" She nodded. She didn't look at me when she said it. I reached for the box, lifting the lid. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was a heart-shaped locket. It looked old, tarnished silver with delicate engravings on the edges. I turned it over in my palm, frowning. That was when I saw the name carved into the back. Emily. A chill crawled up my spine. I looked at her. "Did your parents give you this when you were a kid?" She shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've never seen it before." Something about that didn't sit right with me. I tried to think rationally. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe someone with the same name had owned it before, and whoever sent it had no idea. But something inside me said no. "Was there a note?" I asked. Her expression darkened. Wordlessly, she reached for something on the table and handed it to me. A small, folded card. I opened it. Inside, written in perfect cursive, were just 3 words. "I see you." My heartbeat stuttered. Who the hell would send this? I asked, my voice lower now. Emily didn't answer. Instead, she got up, walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. She pointed outside, and my blood ran cold, because there, sitting neatly on her doorstep, was another box, wrapped in pink paper, tied with a red ribbon. 7:43 p.m. I stared at it, my body rigid. Emily's hands clenched into fists. "It wasn't there 5 minutes ago," she whispered. I checked. I got up, my heart pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it alone. But I couldn't. I had to know. I unlocked the door and stepped outside. The air was sharp, biting against my skin. The street was empty, silent. The box was small like the first one, neatly wrapped, ribbon tied just right. Whoever had left it had taken their time. I picked it up and carried it inside. Emily sat stiffly on the couch as I placed the box on the table. We stared at it. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and uneven. I didn't want to open it, but I did. The ribbon slid off easily. The paper peeled away in neat folds. I lifted the lid. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was a Polaroid photo. I picked it up, turning it toward the light. Then my stomach dropped. It was Emily, taken tonight. She was standing in her kitchen, washing her hands. The window behind her was open. A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. I looked at Emily, and she was already shaking her head, her eyes wide and unblinking. I didn't hear anyone, she whispered. Neither had I, but someone had been there. Someone close enough to take a picture. A sharp, sudden knock echoed through the house. We both jumped. Then, from the other side of the door, a man's voice. Low, steady. Emily. My breath caught in my throat. He knew her name, and he was still here. The knock came again, harder this time. Emily. The voice was low, almost a whisper, but it cut through the silence like a blade. I reached for her hand. She was ice cold. Her breathing had turned shallow, her eyes locked on the front door like she was waiting for it to burst open. I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed the nearest heavy object, a ceramic candle holder from the coffee table, and marched toward the door. My pulse pounded in my ears. I looked through the peephole. Nothing. The porch was empty, but my gut told me he was still there, watching. I waited, barely breathing. After a few seconds, I unlocked the deadbolt, yanked the door open, and stepped outside. Nothing but the night air. No footsteps retreating down the sidewalk. No cars speeding away. Just the wind pushing against the trees, making the shadows stretch across the pavement. Then I looked down. Another box. Pink paper. Red ribbon. Except this time something was wrong with it. The wrapping was wet, the paper sagging in spots like it had been soaked in something thick and dark. A slow drip pattered against the porch beneath it. It wasn't water. Emily made a strangled noise behind me. I bent down, hesitating. The smell hit me first. Coppery, sharp, unmistakable. Blood. I didn't want to open it. I opened it anyway. 7:49 p.m. The lid peeled back, revealing a mess of damp, sticky tissue paper. My stomach rolled as I reached inside, my fingers trembling as they brushed against something warm and soft. I pulled it out, and nearly dropped it. It was a rabbit. A small, white rabbit. Its fur was soaked in blood, matted against its tiny body. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was its eyes. Or rather, the lack of them. Its eye sockets were dark, empty holes, crusted with something black and dry. Someone had removed them, carefully, deliberately. Emily made a gasping, choking sound. I turned to her, my own breath coming in sharp bursts. Go inside, I said. Now. She didn't argue. She stumbled back into the house, and I followed, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I fumbled with the locks. I could still feel the rabbit's warmth on my palms, the blood sticky on my fingers. I bolted to the kitchen, shoving my hands under the sink, scrubbing furiously as if that would erase what I had just touched. Behind me, Emily let out a ragged breath. I don't understand, she whispered. I didn't either. But I knew one thing for sure. Whoever this was, they were escalating. 7:56 p.m. We sat in the living room, the coffee table between us. The pink box sat beside the first one, the ruined tissue paper spilling out. Emily clutched her knees to her chest, her face pale and tight. She hadn't spoken in minutes. I checked my phone for the 100th time, but there were no messages, no calls. The police would have been the obvious next step. But what would we even say? Hey, some lunatic left a locket, a Polaroid, and a mutilated rabbit on the porch. They'd take a report, sure, but unless this guy actually broke in, they wouldn't do much. Then Emily spoke. Her voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. There was something else in the box. I froze. What? She pointed with one shaking finger. I turned back to the table. The blood-soaked tissue paper was still in there, crumpled and messy. But something small and square peeked out from underneath it. Polaroid. Another one. My hands were ice cold as I reached for it. I flipped it over, and every hair on my body stood on end. It was a photo of Emily, taken tonight, but it wasn't like the first one. In this one, she was asleep, in her bed. Her face was half buried in her pillow, her hair spilling across the blankets. The dim glow of her bedside lamp made the shadows stretch across the walls. And at the edge of the frame, just barely visible, was a figure. Standing, watching her. I stared, my mouth dry, my entire body locked in place. Then I flipped it over. Something was written on the back. In that same perfect cursive. I like watching you sleep. A cold, paralyzing horror gripped my chest. I looked at Emily. Her hands were clenched into fists so tight her knuckles had gone white. I lock my doors, she whispered. I always lock my doors. The implication settled between us like a weight. This wasn't just some stalker leaving creepy gifts. This was someone who had been inside her house. I pushed off the couch, my body moving on instinct. I grabbed the nearest weapon I could find, an old baseball bat propped near the door, and started checking every lock, every window, every door. Nothing was broken. No signs of forced entry, which meant he had a key, or he had been inside before and never left. I grabbed Emily's arm. We're leaving, right now. She didn't argue. I barely gave her time to grab her coat before I dragged her outside. My car was parked by the curb, and I shoved her into the passenger seat before locking the doors behind us. As I turned the ignition, my eyes flicked back to the house, to the dark windows, to the open curtain in her bedroom. And that's when I saw it. A silhouette, standing in the window, perfectly still, watching us leave. I peeled out of there so fast my tires screeched against the pavement. We didn't look back. I drove fast, too fast. The streetlights blurred past as my fingers tightened around the wheel, my knuckles aching from the grip. Emily sat in the passenger seat, hunched over, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. I had seen him, a figure in her bedroom window, watching us. I couldn't stop thinking about that Polaroid. Emily asleep, unaware. That shadowy figure lurking in the corner of the frame. Had he been standing there for minutes? Hours? Had he ever left? I glanced at Emily. Her breath was coming in short, shaky bursts. We're going to my place, I said. She nodded but didn't say anything. I checked the mirror. The street behind us was empty, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched. 8:21 p.m., my apartment. I didn't feel much better once we got inside. I locked the door behind us, double-checking the deadbolt, then grabbed the bat from my trunk, just in case. Emily sat on the couch, staring at the floor, her hands twisting together in her lap. We should call the cops, I said, breaking the silence. She let out a hollow laugh. And tell them what? That someone left me a locket, a dead rabbit, and some creepy photos. That someone was inside your house, I said. That's enough. She shook her head. There was no sign of forced entry, no broken locks. They won't do anything. I hated that she was probably right. The only thing worse than knowing someone had been inside her home was knowing they could come back. That they might already have come back. I sat beside her, pulling her into me. You're safe here, I said, though I wasn't entirely sure that was true. She nodded against my chest, but she was still shaking. I stroked her hair, breathing in her familiar scent. Then her phone buzzed. She stiffened. Slowly, she reached for it, her hands trembling as she picked it up from the coffee table. One new text message. No name, just a number she didn't recognize. The message was short. You left too soon. My stomach dropped. Emily's breathing hitched. She stared at the screen like she wanted to throw it across the room. Then, before either of us could react, there was a knock at the door. A single, solid knock. Then another. I stood so fast the coffee table rattled. The bat was in my hands before I even realized I had grabbed it. Emily clamped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide and terrified. The knock came again. Slow. Deliberate. Then something slid under the door. A small, rectangular object. Polaroid. I didn't want to pick it up, but I did. And when I turned it over, my blood turned to ice. It was a picture of us, taken just now. Through the living room window, we were sitting on the couch. Emily curled against me, my hand in her hair. But there was something else. A shadow in the corner. Faint. Just barely visible in the reflection of the TV screen. Someone standing outside. Watching. I lunged toward the door, yanking it open, bat raised. Nothing. Just the cold night air. The hallway was empty. The apartment complex was quiet. No footsteps. No doors shutting. Whoever it was, they were gone. But they had been here. Standing just on the other side of that door. Close enough to hear us. Close enough to... A noise. From outside. The scraping of something against the apartment door. I slammed it shut and locked it. Then I shoved the couch in front of it, my heart hammering so hard I could barely breathe. Emily was shaking. I grabbed my phone, my hands slick with sweat. I'm calling the cops. This wasn't just a stalker anymore. This was someone dangerous. 8:34 p.m. The call. The operator's voice was calm. 911. What's your emergency? I forced my voice to stay steady. Someone is stalking my girlfriend. They've been following us, leaving things at her house, at my house now. They just knocked on my door and left a photo of us inside the apartment. I think they're still out there. The operator asked for my address. I gave it to her. We're sending an officer now, she said. Stay inside. Keep your doors locked. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. Then Emily made a choked noise. She was staring at the door. At something on the floor. Another box. I hadn't even heard it drop. I grabbed the bat, every muscle in my body tensed. But I already knew. I already knew what was inside. I crouched down and unwrapped it. Pink paper. Red ribbon. Inside, nestled in white tissue paper, was something even worse than the rabbit. A human tooth. Long yellowed. A bit of gum tissue still attached to the root. And next to it, a Polaroid. Of Emily's house. Taken from inside. And written on the back in that same neat cursive. You should have stayed home. 8:50 p.m., the sirens. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They checked the apartment. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No lingering footprints in the hallway. They told us to stay somewhere else for the night. I didn't argue. Emily was barely holding herself together. I packed a bag, grabbed my keys, and got us the hell out of there. We got a motel room across town. I deadbolted the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and kept the bat beside me. Emily barely spoke. She just sat on the bed, staring at the wall, pale and silent. I pulled her close, pressing my lips to her temple. We're safe now, I whispered. I wasn't sure if I believed it. She didn't answer. She just turned in my arms and buried her face in my chest. That night we left the lights on. Neither of us slept. The motel room was silent except for Emily's uneven breathing. I hadn't slept. Couldn't. Every sound outside made my muscles tense. Every passing shadow under the door made my fingers tighten around the bat. At 3:12 a.m., Emily sat up suddenly. Her face was pale. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something but couldn't. Then, slowly, her gaze drifted toward the motel room door. I turned to look, and my stomach dropped. There was something under the door. A thin, pink envelope. Emily clutched my arm, nails digging into my skin. I swallowed hard and reached for it. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a single Polaroid. This time it wasn't of Emily. It was me, asleep in bed, taken tonight. And in the background, standing in the motel room's open closet, was a figure. Watching. Inside the room. I lunged off the bed, bat raised, and yanked open the closet door. Empty. But the smell of him was there, faint, sour, like sweat and something rotting. He had been inside. Emily was shaking. "We have to leave," she whispered. I grabbed the keys, my hands slick with sweat. Then my phone vibrated. An unknown number. A text message. "You're making this fun." My stomach twisted. Then another message. "Look outside." I didn't want to, but I did. The motel parking lot was empty, except for one car. A black sedan. Its driver's side door was slightly open. The engine running. The headlights off. Waiting. I backed away from the window. "We're leaving. Now." Emily was already grabbing her things, her movements frantic. I unlocked the door, shoved her outside, and sprinted to my car. My hands fumbled with the keys as I got inside. Then, just before I locked the doors, I heard it, the faintest sound. A whisper, from the back seat. "You should have stayed asleep." I spun around. Nothing. The back seat was empty, but the door was open, like someone had been there a second ago, like someone had just slipped out. I slammed it shut and tore out of the parking lot. Emily was hyperventilating beside me. "Where do we go?" she gasped. I didn't know. I just drove. Street after empty street, turning at random, trying to shake the feeling that no matter where we went, he was already ahead of us. Then, at 3:40 a.m., Emily's phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't answer. A voicemail popped up. Against every instinct screaming no, she hit play. A man's voice. Slow. Amused. "You left a mess at home, Emily. Should I clean it up for you?" Her house. I slammed the brakes. Emily's eyes were wild with terror. "He's there," she whispered. I barely registered my own voice. "We're ending this." I turned the car around. 4:05 a.m., Emily's house. The street was too quiet. Emily's house sat in the darkness, porch light flickering weakly. Something wasn't right. I killed the engine. "Stay here," I said. She grabbed my wrist. "No." I hesitated. Then I nodded. We moved together. The front door was unlocked. Wide open. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with something rotting. Emily gagged, covering her nose. Then we saw it. The living room. The final gift. A box bigger than the others sitting on the floor. And the smell was coming from inside. My pulse thundered. I stepped forward, hands shaking. Emily whimpered, clutching my arm. I reached down, pulled the ribbon loose. The lid fell open. Inside, oh God, inside was a pile of meat, raw, wet, pulsing. And at the center, a human tongue. Emily screamed. Then, a new sound. Slow, steady. Applause. I turned. He was there, standing in the doorway. A man, dressed in black, his face half hidden in the shadows. His hands moved in slow, deliberate claps. Watching us. Emily froze. My grip tightened around the bat. The man tilted his head. "You don't like my gifts?" he murmured. His voice was wrong. Too calm. Like he was enjoying this. Then, without warning, he moved. Too fast. Straight for Emily. I didn't think. I swung. The bat connected with his shoulder, the crack of impact vibrating up my arms. He staggered but didn't fall. Didn't even scream. Just turned those dark, empty eyes on me. Then he laughed. Laughed. Like this was all a game. I grabbed Emily's hand and ran. 4:13 a.m., the escape. We didn't stop. Didn't look back. We tore down the street, into the car, peeling out before he could follow. We didn't go back. Ever. Emily moved in with her sister the next day. Changed numbers. Got a restraining order. But I never saw his face again. Not in person. Only in my dreams. And sometimes in photographs that shouldn't exist. Because every now and then, a new envelope arrives. No return address. No message. Just a Polaroid. Of Emily. Of me. Of places we've been. Places he shouldn't know. A reminder that he's still watching.